Hey everyone, how the Halloween have you been? I'm back with a brand new doll repaint tutorial. We all know the story of the lovely Snow White, tricked into eating a cursed apple that lulled her into a coma until some prince comes along and kisses her. I just had to tear this love story apart with my twisted version. After eating the apple and being encased in her glorious glass coffin to await her prince, he just forgets to show. Poor Snow White was left for who knows how many Halloweens and isn't looking so lovely anymore. Do you guys know how much I love your creative stories about my dolls? So you tell me, what the heck was the prince up to all this time? I am so excited to be back, so without further ado, let's jump straight into Snow White's repaint. Snow White began as a Monster High bonita femur doll. I loved her bony texture all over her chest and arms, and I knew I could resurface her legs with my Dremel and a bit of elbow grease. With her legs a little thinner now, I could cut them up. The gore starts early. I had wanted to shorten her legs to be sure that she could fit into her coffin, but I wanted everything to feel in proportion as well. So I cut a small section from her thighs and a small section from her calves. This made her height comparable to one of my favorite dolls, Twyla, last used in the Female Titan repaint. Cutting her legs this way kept her in proportion. Then I could re-glue her legs back together using super glue. I used PVA glue and tissues to reinforce their strength, but also to retexture all of her skin. Snow White had been abandoned for a while, so I wanted her legs and arms to look wrinkled and sunken with time. I double-coated her legs so that they would look thicker and leathery. Ugh. Over her chest and arms, I only applied a very thin layer. I really wanted to be able to see that awesome bony texture really showing through later. I started to lay down some base paint with some gross purpley red and some white where I'd wanted exposed bone. I used a craft knife to cut torn skin as if she really was starting to fall apart. I started to knock the red undertones back with a light sponging of skin tone. Then I could get really gruesome with some veins and rot. Shading her whole body with pastels created the illusion that her skin was semi-translucent and thinning while leaving the painted textures exposed beneath. After sealing with Liquitex matte varnish, it was time for some clothes. Starting with her shoes, I cleaned this old pink pair before prepping them with a light spray of Testra's Dull Coat. Then I could sponge on a thin layer of white to create an even base before the bright yellow. I painted her little bows to match and glued them in place with some super glue. While I wanted the shoes to feel perfect and new, I also wanted to have bits of her shoes starting to be stained from her beautifully rotting corpse. She really is quite the dark project. But I had so much fun, I couldn't help but add more gore anywhere I could. As for her dress, I recreated an old Monster High t-shirt and skirt, and tried to custom design her cape. I didn't end up using her cape by the end, but I was still glad I'd tried to make it. I've learned now that it's always worth it to iron your fabric before you start, and I do that using my mini hair straightener. Unfortunately, my thinking cap just wasn't on, and once I'd sewn her bodice, I realized there was no way to actually dress her, considering I had already glued her arms together. Awkward. So I had to restart all over again from scratch, which can be very frustrating. To cheer myself back up, I returned to the gore by prepping her face. I used my Dremel to define some of her skull features and cut little imperfections with my super sharp craft knife. Then it was time to paint her head ready for some rerouting. For Snow White, I needed hair that was sleek, shiny, and absolutely beautiful. And with it all rooted, I had to glue it in place. I went in through her eye hole and glued the hair from the inside for a permanent stick. Once all that glue had dried, it was time to truly bring out her zombified features. I started with a lot more epoxy sculpt than I actually needed and spread it all over her face. I then spent time working it back and scraping away the excess little by little. This helped me to define the details and create a thin layer over top where I needed it. By playing around with muscle fibers and teeth, it helped to create the story of her face slowly rotting away, unsaved by the lazy prince. Sad. Most of the time with small details like this, I just try to focus on dimension and texture while allowing the doll's natural face shape to still show through underneath. After letting the details of her face cure, I came back to build up the space behind her eye. I held a tool behind it inside of her head to give me something to work against, and sculpted the empty, rotting socket. When that had cured, I laid down a base coat for both bone and muscle. Then I could get to painting in that texture and realism. I'm not gonna lie, I did work back and forth on her face over and over again, layering it, just trying to get it right. Sometimes I find you can overthink things or get too close to a project, especially faces. But I also think that taking your time and trusting yourself to figure it out in the end tends to lead you in the right direction. I did manage to balance all the textures and gore and sealed her face with 2 coats of Tester's Dull Coat before brushing over some pastels. I love how the pastels work to mattify the bony areas, adding just a bit more realism to its texture. I sealed the pastels with a light sponging of Liquitex matte medium and repainted very specific areas of her face to make them pop. Dusting with pastels can sometimes blur minute details and fade colors, so I wanted to bring them out and define them one last time. When I unwrapped her hair, I noticed I had left just a little visible strip of unpainted plastic along her hairline, so I touched that up with some more acrylic paint. Before cutting Snow White's hair, I divided her part using a small tool and my beloved mini hair straightener. It's worth taking the time to do this so you can hide the plastic of her scalp. Then I could start hacking away at that bob. Back in the day, I was snip happy, which tended to get me into a lot of trouble right at the end of a project. I like to think I've grown a lot since then and tend to leave an extra little bit of length at the ends just in case. Now it was time for the Disney hair salon using a butter knife? You heard me, a butter knife. As long as it's metal, you can heat up any tool to help you style your doll hair. When heating up metal tools, you just need to make sure that the heat doesn't travel up the tool and get too hot for your hands. For Snow White, I needed deliberate curls and shape to her fringe, so I continuously swapped out my tools and shaped her hair little by little. Once the basic shape of her hair was forming, I could attach her red ribbon and then finalize exactly how her hair was going to sit using more hot tools and hairspray. After what felt like ages since starting this dark and gloomy project, I could finally put her head on her body. But we weren't done yet. It was time for her coffin. Now, I'll be releasing a tutorial just for the coffin, as it was such a massive project in its own right. But to mount Snow White in it, I hot glued wooden dowel into her back, and also into place below the satin of the coffin. Last but not least, I slipped some dead flowers into her cold, bony fingers, as if she truly had been waiting there for a long time, and even the flowers had given up and died. As for me, I was ready to kiss this project goodbye, because Snow White was finally finished. Have a happy Halloween and stay spooky.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to show your support. See you next time!